believe Justin.
I think it's right.
Hello, how's everybody doing?
Good.
Thanks for coming. Just want to give you a few housekeeping tips. We are recording this session, so you notice you see the blue lights overhead. That means that anything you say is being recorded. We will stick this up on our Blackboard site. It'll be under Fall 2017 Professional Development Series. So if anybody, we had over 19 people register, so I know quite a few people may be out. If anyone wanted to come and couldn't make it, let them know. Probably by the end of this week, I'll stick it up on Blackboard, and they can, feel free to view it from there. We are live streaming into Pittsburgh, into Harnett, and on our CCCC Life Size website. So just because you don't see people in the room, people may be sitting at their desk watching this. If they have questions, I've asked that they send them to me, and then I'll just let Amy know if we have a question from somebody remote. But welcome to Year 3 End of Cycle Review. I'm also in this category with you, so I'm going to be learning too. But we got an excellent facilitator. Amy always does a great job walking us through everything. And let's go ahead and get started, Amy. Thank you.
So does everyone have a handout? This is a very important thing, okay? I will go give this one next handout. So for folks who are not here, I think just about everyone that is registered is in year 3 or year C for their end of year review. So all of the documents that we're using today as handouts were on the email I sent you. So if you have your laptop with you or if you are at your desk, you should be able to open these up and go along with us. Because the plan is we will go through these handouts and talk about what you need to do for the end of cycle in order to complete this by October 31st. Okay, and just a short introduction, if you don't know me already, my name is Amy Gustafson. I'm the Assistant Director of Institutional Effectiveness and Research, and I love outcomes and assessment, and I hope by the end of this session that you too love it as much as I do. Okay, so the end of years, or the end of cycle review for year C is due on October 31st this year. What's interesting about this is if you don't know, you'll know very soon, but SACS-COC is coming to visit October 24th through October 26th. And the reason that's important is all the folks in this room might be pulled into meetings with them. You might be pulled into places where they will interview you. So you might want to get this done just a little bit earlier than the 31st, so you just have some time. Okay. Some helpful tools on this handout for folks who are not here. This is going to say Year C, End of Cycle Reporting Instruction Sheet, and it's on that email. It has the login information, so it does have the URL right here, but I have a feeling that you all have been spending a lot of time logging in, but this is just a reminder. If you forget your username, if you forget your password, send me an email, and I'm more than happy to reset it for you. So why are we doing the end of cycle review? Why do we do this after 3 years of reporting annually? So this is really a giant closing a loop for the last 3 years. You've been closing a loop every year. So you've been looking at your outcomes and what's come of those outcomes, and then making these plans for the future about how you're going to improve your outcomes in your areas. And each year, the next year, you will actually make the improvements that you promised. So this is just a way to look at everything you've done in the last 3 years and determine what's going well, what needs to be changed for the next 3 years, because at the end of the session, we will be talking about planning for the next 30 years. And so it's an opportunity for you to reflect, to analyze, and prepare for the future. Okay. So after you log into Compliance Assist, you'll get to the homepage. And once you're here, you can either navigate by going to available websites here, and I have more links than you all do, but everyone in this room will have Program Review. So I've highlighted Program Review, so you click on that. and it's moving a little bit slowly. Once you get there, on this red bar is how you navigate to get to your individual area. And Richard Love has been very kind to let us use paralegal as our example for today. So from the drop down, I chose instructional programs, and then I'm choosing paralegal. And we are using paralegal as our example today because instructional programs have 2 more links or 2 more areas of the end of cycle review that they do have to complete in comparison with service areas. But except for these 2 links, everything is going to be the same for everyone. But we'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so you've gotten to your area on this first handout. The next thing I suggest you do on the second page of this handout entitled End of Cycle Reporting Instruction Sheet is to go in and print out your 2016-2017 Outcomes and Assessment Planning Report. The idea behind this is the entire point of this review is to see what's happened in the last 3 years. And the good news is all your data for the last 3 years will be in your 2016-17 tab. So all your student learning outcomes, your service area outcomes, administrative outcomes, quality and viability criteria. And the really, really easy way you can print this out is by going in the upper right-hand corner to where it says options right here. And this is where you go into edit usually. And then you go down to printable file. You'll click on printable file. I don't usually change any of these defaults, but you're welcome to if you'd like to. Hit generate PDF. It usually takes a few minutes for it to generate the PDF. But by the time this is done, it will have all of your outcomes and assessments for 16 and 17 all in one PDF. So it means you don't have to go to each of the 3 years individually. You can just look in this one place. And so you scroll down and you have everything you need right here. The only other thing I would suggest is do save this to your computer and then print it. There's this weird thing with Compliance Assist that if you try to print from here, it moves the tables around, it does crazy things because this isn't real Adobe, but if you save it and then open it, it is real Adobe. Anyway, just save it and then print it. Okay, so after you've printed this and you're reviewing it and looking at it, what you're trying to do is look at the big picture from the last 30 years. So you will look at your student learning outcomes, you'll look at all your administrative outcomes, you will look at all of your quality and viability criteria, and accomplishments and innovations. Okay, so now that you've done that portion of the review, it's time to get into the end of cycle program review. And we will be spending the majority of today going through all of these links individually and really talking about this in depth, because this is why you came to the session, is to get this particular instruction. The only other thing I do want to mention on this handout is the last thing for the first handout is you do need to create new 17-18 outcomes for the next 3 years. So once you have completed the end of cycle, there is a prompt towards the end for you to create new outcomes.
Sorry, I'm
Okay, so back to that end of cycle program review tab. The great news for everyone is I printed out blank copies of this as a PDF format, so you can go through this page by page and make notes on here for everything we're going to discuss. Originally, I was going to annotate this for you all, but I feel like there are already a lot of words in here to begin with, so I thought it would be more beneficial for you all to actually add your own comments of what you want to do, what you need to do for each of these things. Okay. So again, we are on the end of cycle program review 2017 tab, and we're going to scroll down and we're going to start with section 2A, or how did I want to do? Well, we're going to start with section 2 because the instructions are really what I'm going to talk you through right now, step by step, so we don't need to go into that. So section 2A is review of quality and viability criteria. So the first thing that this section asks you to do is to go through all of your data for the last 30 years. And for instructional, the last 3 years are 2013-14, 14-15, and 15-16. If you notice, you will not be reviewing or discussing data from 16-17 because this type of data in the quality and viability section, and let me toggle back, this information lives right here for instructional programs. So program data has the answers to the majority of this chart. So if you click on that, you will get all the answers for this. And I'm going to go to our page for institutional effectiveness and research. And for us, if you are in a service area, it's going to be in section 3A, quality and viability criteria. So the responses to this section will be there for you all. Okay, so we're back in the section, and the first thing that you see is we want you to think about program FTE if you're an instructional program. And the target for program FTE is it will either be maintained or increased every year for 13-14, 14-15, 15-16. And if you look at your data for your FTE in that section 3 or section 4, depending on your area, you'll be able to quickly say, did I meet this? Yes or no. And all you have to do is type in yes here or no. If it went up, it's yes. If it went down, it's no. And then after you do that 1, 2, 30, you come over here and you do your summary remarks here. And you can be as verbose as you want to be or as concise as you would like to be. So one sentence is fine with us, but I do know that there are some people that like to talk more about what's going on with all of their data. Next, you have program enrollment trends, and it's just that same process. You're going to look at this program data link right here. The data will be very clearly labeled right there for you all. You come back over here, you say yes or no. If it was maintained, if it increased, it's yes, if it went down, it's no, and then talking about it. And so you basically just repeat this process over and over again until you get to question number 7, which is advisory committee. So the advisory committee is not a part of quality and viability for instructional programs. Again, I'm going to switch to the other page. This is going to be in section 4B, so advisory committee updates. And so here, our goal is that curriculum leaders and supervising deans discuss the effectiveness of the advisory committee. So in other words, did the advisory committee meet? And is it effective to inform you about how you need to improve your program going forward? And then second to last on this page is departmental discussions. And so what should have happened for the last 3 years is every year you should have had at least one department meeting. And then you should have uploaded the minutes from those department meetings into Compliance Assist. So it's a matter of looking at those department meetings. Did you discuss program content? Did you discuss pedagogy or instructional methods? Did you discuss technologies, resources and materials, personnel, professional development, workforce demand / occupational need? So it's just a matter of putting X's in these blue spots of saying what you discussed over the last 30 years and then saying, was it met? And for us, the target was, we would like you to have minutes documenting what you discussed. So if you have minutes there, yes, you have met this target, and you say yes, yes, yes. And then you can talk a little bit in this blue box over here about what you discovered in all of these meetings. So in your advisory committee, in your departmental discussions. Okay, after you've reviewed all of your data, you can come down here and talk about your achievements and challenges and recommendations based off of what you've learned from looking at this particular section. So if you've discovered that, our enrollment is going down a little bit, you can talk about why you think that is happening. And then think about how would you like to present in the future. future. Because again, this entire process is trying to think about what happened in the past, trying to make changes now so we can improve things in the future. Because by making this improvements for all of your areas, you will make improvements for your students. So we will have more student success on our campus. Okay, so that was a lot of information for that first one. Do you all have any questions about the quality and viability criteria section?
For those that are like non-program, like mine,
Yeah.
I just leave with all that open.
Let's see, so for service areas, we do actually have that, but we have a different problem. So I'm gonna go to service areas right now. So all of our stuff is really based off of survey data. And so you can go in and do the same process of, did you meet the targets? The minimum is 88%. And in thinking about this year's survey data, I think everyone got at least 88% on those surveys. You can look at your survey data for your area, and if you don't have it, your dean or your vice president will have it. And then you just say, was it met, yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, and then talking in the summary remarks.
And Amy, is it still, what are the year 1, 2, and 3 for?
Okay, so this is fun. So for service areas, it's like the real years. So for us, I'm going to scroll up. It's going to be 16, 17. It's going to be 15, 16, and it will be 14, 15.
Okay.
And it's actually also those 3 years for instructional as well. Just know that the data that is reported in those years are actually, it's the data from the year before. And the entire reason we're reporting on data that's almost a year old is honestly, instructional programs, this information can change on a daily basis, even after the fact. And so what we're trying to do is get the official numbers that we sent to the system office, and after we send it to them, they send it back to the colleges in April. And so that is the approved, final, agreed number for all of the programs. And so that's why we're waiting on it. Does that make sense?
But for me, I just wouldn't put in 14, 15, right?
No, you wouldn't.
Okay.
Okay. So let's head back and look at what we're going to talk about next. I think this is the area that everyone is most used to looking at when they're looking at outcomes and assessment, and that's looking at your service area outcomes or your student learning outcomes. And this is a review of the last 3 years. So again, you're going to print out your 16-17 tab. You're going to read through all of your outcomes to see, did you meet your targets? What did your closing the loops look like? And actually, let's look at this now so you can get a better idea of what this particular review looks like. And just so you know, if you want my personal opinion, out of this entire process, that first one, 2A, is the one that seems to be the most complicated for people, but after you get through that, I think the rest of it is going to be smooth sailing. Okay, so we're going to review of student learning outcomes. And so I feel like this is so much easier to digest and think about. Okay, so the first prompt that we're going to look at is, do the student learning outcomes accurately reflect important program competencies? So in other words, this is looking at the outcomes that you chose for the last 30 years. Are these important outcomes for your areas? Are these the big picture items? So let me give you an example. So when we're talking about student learning outcomes, what we really want people to think about is, when a student walks across the stage, what are the 8 really big things you want them to be able to do when they get there, or whatever number is for your area, but the big picture items. So for some people, they made their student learning outcomes very, very small and very, very narrow. So this is very basic. But imagine you're in laser photonics, and the first thing you want someone to be able to do is turn on a laser. Now they didn't do this, but this is an example. But if you made that a student learning outcome, that is not meaty enough. That is not big picture enough. We need to think about what happens at the end. So what do we want them to be able to do with those lasers at the end when they graduate? What projects should they be able to do? What should they be able to produce as a result of being in the program? And again here, it's just 1 or 2 sentences after you look at all of your outcomes. Are these important? Did you want to measure these? Next is, do the assessment methods accurately measure student learning for each SLO? Okay, so another example is we had some folks decide that they're going to make an exam one of their assessment methods. And now this sounds great, right? But what ended up happening is that they only used one question on the entire exam to say that the student learning outcome was met. And so if you're promising that students will be able to do X, Y, and Z by the time they graduate, having one question on one exam is not enough to show that they can actually do what you want them to do. So a way that you can revise it is if the entire exam covered the content that you were looking for, that would be an acceptable outcome or an acceptable assessment method. And there are other ways you can do it, like are there presentations they have to do? Are there projects they have to do? Are there things they have to create that they have to turn in? Next, overall, were your targets met? And this is really important because remember, this is the giant closing the loop. And it's honestly with outcomes and assessment, it is okay if you don't meet your target. Because remember, the entire idea is growing. And if there's any growth at all, it means that maybe that's 15% more students, 20, 30, 70% more students that succeeded that might not have been able to otherwise. So here it's just simply, were they met, yes or no? Next, just thinking about what did you learn after reading through all of your outcomes, whether they were in the service area or they were in the instructional area. So I talked a lot about closing the loop. This next prompt says, briefly summarize programs improvements made, including month and year, over the past 3 years as a result of the assessment results. So in other words, what we want you to do right here is think about all those closing loops. Like, how many times did you update your syllabus in order for students to know more effectively what was expected of them? How many times did you change how you taught a class? Did you spend 2 or 3 days on a concept that students were not getting, that they could have gotten, that they were only getting instruction on for 1 day? Next, what changes would you recommend to your SLOs, your student area outcomes, your assessment and targets for the next 3-year planning cycle? So after looking at this section, what do you want to do differently? How can you improve this? So that's all of review of student learning outcomes. Do you all have any questions about this section? You guys good? Okay, great. If you don't know the month, that's fine. I feel like even if you say like the 15-16 academic year or 16-17, I think that would be okay. And especially with instructional programs, I find that people make the adjustments before the school year starts in order to improve it for the next year. Okay, we are not going to talk about review of administrative outcomes because that is those are the exact same prompts. It's just for a different focus. And as a comparison, if you're in a service area, you don't even have administrative outcomes, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's one less thing to think about. Okay, so I mentioned that there are two things that are different between instructional and service areas, and this is one of them, which is the library collection evaluation. If you're a service area, you don't have to do this, so that's great. But what this section is asking you to do is to review the library collection, both the print and online collection, to determine if it meets the needs of your students and your area. And the first thing that the library would like you to do is to schedule a visit with the library director. So go and talk to her, Tara Lucas. So go talk to her, complete the collection review, which is actually looking at the physical items and what's online. And then you will come down here and fill out this library collection evaluation form. And this process is informative because it tells them what areas are missing resources, what needs to be updated. So in other words, it allows them to buy things for you. So if you want the library to buy a lot of things for you, do a really good job on this section. Okay, so great news, we've completed section 2. Section 3 is looking a little bit more at the big picture and not just your student learning outcomes or your student area outcomes. This section is actually one of my favorite parts of this entire process because you get to think about your strengths, your weaknesses, any challenges, and then think about ways you can make changes in the future. So that's very exciting. So let's start with the strengths. So what we'd like you to do is to identify strengths that have been told to you by students, strengths that have been identified by faculty and staff, strengths that are identified by employers, and then analysis and observation. So for these first three areas, so identifying the strengths, it's basically just the facts. What do you know from people that they think you're doing very, very well? And this can be both formal and informal feedback. So it can come from the surveys, or it can come from a student or a faculty member stopping you in the hall and saying, hey, I really like how you're doing this in the paralegal program. I want you to do more of this. So both formal and informal feedback is completely fine. So after you've presented the facts for these first three lines, then you'll just include an analysis or your observations there. So you can say, oh yeah, we are doing these things well, or we need to change some things. But let's get to the change part in just a second. So next we're going to go to, did you have any questions about strengths?
Amy,
Yes.
if we are referencing sources, do we need to cite those through what we're writing, or are we able to just say it anecdotally?
Amanda, that is very thoughtful. I love that you've asked that question, because no one has ever asked that question in the last 2.5 years. If it's easy for you to say, according to the 15-16 graduate survey, X number of students felt this way about distance ed, you can do that, or the enrolled student survey, or whatever survey that you're looking at, that's fine with me. But you don't have to upload documentation for it or anything.
All right, thank you.
Okay, next, weaknesses versus challenges. Now, this is usually a stumbling block for folks because they're wondering, these kind of both look like the exact same thing. Why are we doing this twice? Well, the difference between these two things are weaknesses are internal issues. So these are things that aren't going quite as well as you would like them to do, but you have some control over it. So in other words, if, let's say, a class is underperforming, you have some control over that because you can talk with the instructor and say, oh, can you improve your teaching? Or if a class, an entire program doesn't do well in a certain part of the licensing exam, you can go back and try to increase the instruction for that area. So in some way, you have some control over that. So that's an internal issue. A challenge is external. You have no control over this. So for example, your budget that comes down, you do ask for a budget every year, but you have no control over what budget you actually get. So that's an external issue. So for example, if you wanted to buy a giant piece of software and you don't get the budget for it, that would be an external challenge. Some other examples that have come up recently, so the entire plant closes down and your program is a feeder program to get people to go work at that plant, that's going to be a challenge for you. So do you have any questions about weaknesses or challenges? Okay, it's going, and just to bring it up, it is that same format. So it's weaknesses identified by students, weaknesses identified by faculty and staff, weaknesses identified by employers, and then your observations. And just a reminder, you can, again, use both formal and informal responses here. So if someone stops you at Food Line to tell you something that they wish you were doing different, yes, you can include that here.
Amy,
Yes.
when we're talking about weaknesses, challenges, and things that we're looking for, is there a timetable where we should cut off and report on, where we should wait to report on anything different after? Because, for example, a lot of changes happened over this most recent summer. So do we consider that into this one, or does that actually get more considered into our next cycle?
Well, the fun part about Section 30 is it's actually a launching point for thinking about what outcomes you're going to create in the future. And so it's thinking about like what's happening right now.
Okay.
Like, and so any changes that happen with organization, yeah, that would definitely be
Out of this
yeah, for
cycle?
this cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we did a mini SWOT analysis right here with strengths, weaknesses, and challenge. And the next thing we're going to look at is actually recommendations and strategies for change. So on this chart, there is a lot going on. But just remember, at the very easiest way to think about this section is you are closing the loop on all of your closing loops. So if you do nothing else, look at your outcomes and look at where your outcomes landed for this year, especially with closing the loop. Because, technically with the 3-year cycle ending, you can make a promise about what you want to change in the future. But if you end up changing all of your outcomes going forward, you're not going to be tracking that anymore. But recording it here is a way of tracking it and just dotting all your I's, crossing all your T's. So the first thing that appears here is evidence that change is needed. So if you want to take notes, this is on page 11 of that handout. And this part is asking you, so how do you know that something is still not going well in your area, and how do you know that you want to improve something? So here you can say, well, student learning outcome or service area outcome number 2, we still didn't meet it after 3 years. We never met it for any of the 3 years, so we know that that needs to be changed. From there, you will put together a plan for how you can improve this going forward, even if you decide not to measure it going into the future. Because there should be some follow-up of what are you going to do or sustain to improve things in the future. From here, it's just a matter of responsibility. Yes, Chris?
Still a question, what if you don't have any evidence of change is needed? Like all your programs improved through the course for 3 years, and so you're stuck with, well, my new SLO is something completely different that I can improve. Do we put that in here, or do we do anything?
So this brings us to option number 2. If all of your outcomes were perfectly awesome this year, which
Well, they go up.
was going up, and that's what we want is meeting those targets. So if all of those things are met, then you can look at those challenges and those weaknesses that we just talked about and say that is the evidence that we need to work on something. So if your survey data indicates that you're not quite where you want your program to be, you can say that here. Or if you say that 20 students have stopped me in the hallway to tell me that we need to work on this part of automotive.
Something completely different.
Yeah, something completely different.
So that's where you're putting it in here.
Yeah, you can put it in there. And then again, it's just a process of going through, like, how do you plan to improve it and improve this in the future? Who's going to do it?
So this has nothing really to do with your SLOs. To a point. I mean, if you don't want to include them, if they're great, that all worked out, you're going to pick something and put it in.
Pick something and put it in here. And if your SLOs are all met, you can put on the first line, all SAOs or all SLOs were met, and then you don't have to fill out the rest of it, and that would be perfectly acceptable. From there, it's a matter of asking what funds do you need in order to complete something, to complete this project. And again, I will just caution everyone, be very, very careful about initiating projects where you don't already have the budget in place, because we have no control over that. I mean, like, that budget changes all the time, and there are things that are pulled, all over campus, and Dr. Price can tell you more about the budget. That's about the extent of my knowledge, but just be careful with that one. And then current progress or results is, just an update as of today, what is going on with this outcome. So after you do that, for your SAOs, your SLOs, and even administrative outcomes, you'll come down here and think about identify and discuss any curricular changes that may occur within the next 5 years. So here, what we're trying to do is help you to think big picture, like what will affect your area. So, for example, this just came to me because I'm looking at Richard Love, that I know he has the paralegal program. For sure, at some point, the paralegal program did all of their research using books. At some point, they transitioned to using things like Westlaw Online to do a lot of that legal research, right? And so that would have been an issue for them at some point in time about how do they plan for that going forward. Or if you have some brand new machinery that's coming out that's revolutionizing your area or your industry, that's something that you can put in here too. Then from there, identify and discuss any other future plans for your program over the next 5 years. Okay, so does anyone have any other questions about recommendations and strategies for change? Okay. we're almost to the end of part 2 out of 3 parts, which is create new outcomes. So this one is deceptively easy, because really what we want you to do for create new outcomes is to basically just put an X mark next to outcome 1, 2, and 3, once you've actually selected an outcome, a program outcome, a measure, and criteria for the next 3 years. Because the problem we ran into this year is that people did this process, but this prompt wasn't here to help them plan for the future. So they got to about May and realized that they had no outcomes for the next 3 years, even though, we talked about it, but it just still didn't happen. So this is basically a reminder of, yes, you do need to go into your 17-18 page and to put your student learning outcomes in, put any administrative outcomes in, and start planning for the future. Okay, so let's take a deep breath and move on to section 3, which is actually talking about creating new outcomes and assessment. So if you would, head to your 3rd handout in the packet. And for folks who are not here, this is in your email, and it says optional outcomes and assessment, planning guide, and checklist. So this is something that we put together to help you think through this process, because what we find in IER is you really only have to create new outcomes once every 3 years. So you just need a reminder of how to do it. Or maybe you inherited all of your outcomes and you need to learn how to do it from scratch. Okay. So let's talk about this handout right now. Okay, so we are doing this planning for new outcomes and assessment based off of all the amazing information that we learned from doing that end of cycle review. So that end of cycle review had a purpose, is to help you, inform you about realistically what is going on in your area, what is going on in your program, and what can we do in the future in order to improve things. And I really encourage you not to just choose the easy outcomes, choose things that will push you a little bit, because even if you grow just a little bit, that's more student success we have, or that's more things that we can do in business services that get out to people faster. I mean, everything we do for this process helps us all to grow in our areas and just makes CCCC a stronger place. Okay, so thinking about this worksheet, let's start by talking about what outcomes should be. So first, they should be SMART. They should be very, very specific. So you should be clear about what your population needs to accomplish, as well as when they need to do it, where they need to do it, or how they need to do it. And you do need to use action verbs, but we'll talk about those action verbs in just a second in that second outcomes format area. So remember, outcomes should be very, very specific. And the more narrow you can make your outcome, the better. Not too narrow, like I mentioned, starting up a laser, that's too narrow. But don't have a compound outcome where you're measuring 6 things. And if you think you have an outcome like that, send me an email, stop by my office, and I can look at them with you. Because there was one area that I looked at, and they had 4 outcomes selected already. And then for each of those outcomes, they had 6 components within those outcomes. So that's 24 outcomes they would have been assessing. And that's just too much. You really need to just focus on one thing. Next, your outcomes should be measurable. So your outcomes should be quantifiable, and a target should be able to be set. So in other words, you should be able to measure this in numbers. So for service areas, it's like the number of people that completed training, or number of people, or the amount of time that people waited for your services. These are all things that you can count. But if you don't have someone for sure that can tell you, oh, someone waited 20 minutes as opposed to 18 minutes, that's not a really great outcome. But for example, I know that the copy center, whenever I send a request to them, like that's recorded. And so they can tell, oh, we got it on this day, and then you're able to complete it within this many number of hours, right? And so like that's a way that you can easily tell if an outcome is measurable.
Amy, I have a question. When you're doing something like that, is it okay to take a sample? So, like for me, and I'm sure like with business services, you get so many requests. But to quantify that over a period of time, sometimes that's just so much data. Could you take a sample and say, and if so, what's a good sample size for the institution? Like, what should our target be if we're going to sample versus say, for sure? Because that would take hours to gather.
So that's the other thing. You should choose an outcome that is not going to impose undue hardship on yourself. And you can always choose something that you're already measuring already. It's just a matter of reporting on it if that's something that you want to improve on. But to answer your question, Daisha, I would want to talk with people individually about that because I really feel like sampling would be a case-by-case basis. And if you want to sample, it could be an indicator that the outcome is too big to begin with, and we need to narrow it down and focus on something.
Okay.
Next, your outcome should be achievable. Like realistically, you should have the capability to achieve it within the next 30 years. If this is something that is so huge that you don't think you'll be able to do that, maybe think about another outcome because there's a lot you can do in all of your areas to make improvements. You don't have to record everything in your outcomes and assessment, just a few things that you want to really focus on for the next 30 years. Next, it should be realistic. So you want to make sure that the outcome is actually practical. Can it be achieved in the time frame? And can you do it on your current budget? And again, that's where I emphasize, make sure you can do it on your current budget because you don't want to have only 3 outcomes and then one you can never complete because you didn't have the tools at the start to actually complete them. And then time bound is pretty easy for us because we're doing this process over 3 years. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is this outcomes format. So population will be able to action verb intended result. So this is the format that we want you to use when you write your outcomes. It looks a little esoteric when you're looking at it now, but we provided examples for you on this handout, 2 for instructional, 2 for service areas of how you can write it. And I went through people's outcomes and assessment on this campus. So these are real outcomes and assessments. And I'm looking at Richard Love, because his the first one that I chose, which is students will be able to cite legal resources in writing. And then service area, one example from that is admissions will maximize testing operations so that testing resources are being used efficiently. So this is just the way that you're going to set up. These are all very measurable, they're achievable, they're specific enough that you can do this over 3 years, but not too big that it's going to be overwhelming. New this year are some helpful resources I wanted to share with you all. Okay, so this is a printout right now, but I did send this to you as a PDF, so you can click on these links right here. So the first one is Bloom's taxonomy. So this is, in other words, a hierarchy of learning and higher education. And I do have handouts with me of some quick flip charts of Bloom's taxonomy that I think will really benefit instructional programs, and you're welcome to take one even if you're not in an instructional program. Okay, so we just handed out this Bloom's taxonomy flip chart, and this is just a way of looking at action verbs of how you're going to learn things. The next link on this page is the Florida Curriculum Frameworks. And this is really, really, really helpful if you're an instructional program because the state of Florida has mapped out every educational program from kindergarten through the graduate programs. So that is all the big giant program outcomes as well as the student learning outcomes. So if you're stuck and you have no idea what student learning outcomes you want to look at, you can go there and browse through their framework. So it's very, very helpful.
You can borrow them.
Oh yeah, you can borrow them. Yes. For service areas, you can do a similar thing by using Google. So you can go into Google. And you can do a search for information technology. This is my example, outcomes. And then site:/.edu. And this will bring back information technology outcomes on a .edu website. And so this is really, really helpful. So you can do this with distance education. I've done it with institutional effectiveness and research because I want to see what other people in my areas are doing. And you can browse through these in order to get ideas about what outcomes you want to use going forward. Okay, so flipping over to the back of your page, let's talk about actually putting some things in your outcomes and assessment, and I'm going to use IDRs for this one. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is you do need to have a program outcome, and for us it's called the service area mission and goals for service areas. So when I click on this, I have the mission of IDR, and I have all of our goals here. Now the reason why this is important is because this is all a hierarchy, right? So right now, we have a promise that our service area supports the mission and goals of the college in this very specific way. And so for us, we have said it's everything for our mission because we touch a lot of areas. And so we have a discussion over here on the right-hand side about how our mission supports the goals. Now, every area has this, and you're welcome to update them this year or just borrow them because in general, it should pretty much remain the same because you have the same promise over time of what your area does to support the college. Okay, so, actually, hold on, I just show you guys one more thing. So here's our mission. Again, remember, here are our goals underneath that. We are going to take this and go to our service area outcome. And we are going to put our service area goal or your service area or your program outcome right here. So it has to kind of be a hierarchy of connection. So if you put something here that doesn't appear in that other link we were just looking at a minute ago, you do need to copy it and stick it in there. But the easiest thing for you to do is to take a look at your program outcomes that you already have or your service area outcomes that you already have, borrow that and put it in this second part. Okay, so once you've done that first step of creating what your outcome should look like, this is where you will put it, is in the intended service area outcome, or your intended student learning outcome. From there, you're going to talk about state the means of assessing the outcome. So for us, this was annual review of unit planners' completion of outcomes and assessment connection. And our state the criteria for success was 100% of unit planners have tied their area mission to the institutional mission. And you can see from 15-16 that still didn't happen. It's still 97%. I will caution you all, I would not suggest using 100% as a target because you can't really grow every year if you reach that. So you can dial it down just a little bit. Okay, and so what's the great part about this process, it's a matter of filling this box and only this box out right now at least 3 times or more depending on what your dean or your vice president says. So just remember that you need at least 3 student learning outcomes, you need at least 3 service area outcomes. But again, this number is determined by your dean, your provost, your vice president. So do talk with them because there are deans that require their areas to have at least 6 outcomes. So talk with them, they set everything. So getting back to the handout, for number 4, choose the measure. These are just suggestions that you can use of how you want to measure your outcome. So for instructional programs, you can do papers, presentations, lab work, projects, chapter exams, and certification exams. And you can use a rubric to actually assess student learning in order to determine how much did they actually learn. This is a great tool for you all to use. And that link right there is to the AACU collection of rubrics that were standardized across 120 different colleges. So these have been vetted very, very well. And so you don't have to create something new. You can just download this rubric and use it to grade your projects, your assignments, your lab work. For service areas, we can use things like processing logs, time to completion logs, reports, project tracking in Excel, questions on official CCCC surveys, and focus groups or interviews. These are all different ways that you can collect information. Okay, so once you've chosen the measure, you will put it here, because this is your means of measuring. And then your criteria for success. This is how do you know once you've reached your outcome or your goal. So for instructional programs, we want you to use this very specific formula that is on this handout. So it's percentage of students will receive a percentage or better on the assessment. So for example, it would be 90% of students will receive an 80% or better. My suggestion to you all for this one is, I know I said don't use 100% before, but make it easier on yourself so you don't have to do a lot of math. So if you say 100% of students receive an 85% on their assignment or better, that's very easy to grade. Otherwise, if you're saying 90% of students will receive an 85 or 80% or better, like you have to do a lot more math right there. It's easier to just go through and count. If you're saying 100% of students will receive a very solid B. And just a reminder, you do need to have at least an 80% or better for instructional areas because we want a certain level of performance and quality for our student learning. Now, the only exception to this is Fred Fritz did say that A&P is very, very difficult, so he thought it was acceptable for them to have a C. And I think that is fair because that is not an easy class. So that is one exception, but in general, let's keep it at 80% or better for everyone. So for service areas, we have some examples, which is increased distribution of marketing materials by 10% every year. Another example is 93% of faculty and staff will report satisfactory on the survey for maintenance services. And so this is, again, quantifiable. It's very easy to say, did they hit 90%? Did they not hit 90%? Did you hit 93%? Did you not do it? And then that's when you get into the reporting down here. Okay, so once you go through this entire process and you've created at least 3 outcomes for 17-18, once again, you will go in here to this create new outcome section and just mark off X's. Yes, I added an outcome for outcome 1. I connected it to a program outcome. I added a measure for it. I added criteria for it, and I completed it on this page.
Let me make sure about this one more time. So the outcome should be part of the SLO.
Yes.
So again, one more time. The outcome should be part of the SLO. Okay.
Okay, so the reason why this is confusing, and we had a problem naming this. I'm really, really, really sorry about this. Okay, so outcome 1, where it's listed right here, we are thinking of it as this entire, this is not highlighted very well, but imagine it just highlighted that first line right there, like just that one outcome, okay? And when you go into that one outcome, this outcome actually has 4 parts that we have to think about. And those 4 parts are right here. So first is the student learning outcome, which is this first part right here. And we had to keep it generic because we have student learning outcomes and we have student and service area outcomes. So the second part is, does it connect to a program outcome? So this is a program outcome. And we're going back here and saying, yes, it connects to a program outcome. From here, we're going back and saying, state the means of assessing this. Do we have a way that we're assessing this? Yes, I think we switched to paralegal. So it looks like we are given numerous practicing exercises on citation and case briefs, and they will be tested on that. So yes, they have a means of assessing this. And then state the criteria for success. The target is 80% of students will receive a B or better. So yes, they had to do a little bit of math for this one, but if you're okay doing math, that's fine with me. Okay, did that help?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the outcome is tied to the SLO. It's just not, whatever. I was confused before. I just wanted to make sure that I understood it correctly, that the outcome is tied to the SLO.
And in order to make this a little bit easier for y'all, if you lose the checklist by any chance, we did upload it here at the bottom, so you can download it and print it out. And it does have the links to the Bloom's taxonomy I was talking about before. And so this is that hierarchy of learning. And then the other thing it has that I wanted to mention is, the Florida Curriculum Frameworks. So this is what I mentioned before, that if you click on these, it gets you to all the program outcomes, all their student learning outcomes broken out for you.
And so, real quick, the end of cycle, section 4 there, we're doing it in 2017, 18.
Yes.
And going back and saying we didn't. Okay. So before we can really move on forward, we're already creating and saying that's the end of this review. Is that we created the outcomes and the SLF that go with it.
Okay, so I know that was a lot of information. I'm sorry how much information it was, but I hope it was helpful with what you learned today. Do you all have any questions at this moment? Well, if you would, this wouldn't be an IER session if we didn't assess what we learned. So I have a note card that's attached on the back of all of your